dividing fractions. Okay, this is the introduction to dividing of fractions. What do we mean by dividing fractions? Well, division with fractions involves working with reciprocals. We'll understand what is a reciprocal. To present the concept of reciprocal, we consider a problem. Say, for example, problem, so this will be our first problem, and this problem is 5/7, okay, times 7/5. This will give us, according to our rules of multiplication, it says multiply the numerators, and that gives us 35 over 35. Okay, now if we were to consider this another way, we would say 5/7 times 7/5. To simplify, remove the common factors of 5 and 7 and from the numerator and the denominator. So this cancels with this cancels with this. To multiply the remaining factors in the numerator and multiply the remaining factors in the denominator. Remaining factors is 1, 1, 1, 1 gives us 1 over 1. We all know at this point that any whole number, which is this one, divided by 1 is equal to that number, which in this case is 1. Now, the product of what we are seeing here is as follows. So the product simply means that if we were to take 5/7 times 7/5, we get 1. That's the product. So whenever the product of two numbers, which are fraction in this case, is 1, we say that those numbers are the reciprocals. So these are the reciprocals of each other. Therefore 5/7 and 7/5 are reciprocals. To find the reciprocal of a fraction, we invert the numerator and the denominator. So that's what happens. So two numbers, so let me write a rule here. Two numbers are called reciprocals if their product is 1. Okay, caution, a caution that you need to know: 0 does not have a reciprocal, because the product of 0 and a number can never be 1. Okay, so let's try three more examples. Very important, these 3 examples. We have 2/3. Well, what's the reciprocal of 2/3? We said, well, our strategy first of all is to invert. Okay, so strategy: to find each reciprocal, we will invert the numerator and the denominator. So just invert them. So you have 3/2. Notice how they went across this way and across that way. Now, having inverted, now we say that 2/3, its reciprocal is 3/2. And if we were to say 2/3 times 3/2, we get a product of 1. Okay, another example is as follows. This deals with a negative value. Negative, let's see what negative we can use. Negative 5/6. That's our fraction that we're going to be working with. It says invert, so it becomes negative 6/5. We need to invert everything. So this goes this way and this goes this way. Okay, so once we have inverted, we can now say that that's the reciprocal. That's all. Now, to prove it, let's multiply it out. We said negative 5/6 times negative 6/5. The product of two fractions with signs, with like signs, is positive. So so the negative goes away. So we say 5, so they cancel out, giving us 1. Okay, now with a whole number, consider a whole number 7. We know that the reciprocal of 5 or of 7 in this case is 1/7. Why? Because any whole number can be written as the whole number over 1. So therefore, when we invert it, it becomes 1/7. And when we cancel out, we get 1. So therefore, the reciprocal of a whole number is always 1 over that whole number. So reciprocal is equals to 1/7. Okay, don't confuse the concepts of opposite of a negative number and the reciprocal of a negative number. Okay, they are different. For example, the reciprocal example, okay, negative 9/15 has reciprocal of negative 5 negative 15 nines. The opposite now of negative 9/16 is not negative 16 over 9, it is 9/16. Remember absolute values, this is what it comes, the opposite. Okay, now let's divide fractions. So this is dividing fractions, which we have understood before we go into our main part of dividing fractions. So the fractions that we are going to be working with, so let's write this down here, dividing fractions. And when we are going to divide fractions, let's work with a few examples. For example, let me write to the problem to divide two fractions. Remember, we just went, what's the reciprocal? Multiply the first fraction by the reciprocal of the second fraction. Simplify the result if possible. Okay, now what does that mean? For example, to find a fraction divided by another fraction, we will multiply the first fraction by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So let's get an example. Example here, divide 2/3 by 7/8. That's what we are going to divide by. So how do we work this out? Well, the strategy is we will multiply the first fraction. We multiply the first fraction, which is 2/3, by the reciprocal of the second fraction, which is 7/8. So we will need the reciprocal of the 7/8. Then if possible, we will simplify the result. Why? The result for dividing two fractions, that's why. So solution is as follows. We will take the first fraction, 2/3 times 8/7. Remember, this is the reciprocal for it to become. So now we multiply the numerators and we multiply the denominators. So now this becomes now 2 times 8, 16, 3 times 7, 21. That is how we multiply the two fractions. Okay, now let's divide and multiply. So divide b and multiply, and the example we are going to be looking at is 4/5 divided by 8/25. Strategy: we multiply the first fraction. Let's take our first fraction, 4/5, okay, by the reciprocal of the second fraction. That's the second fraction. Its reciprocal will be times 25/8. You may use the multiplication sign, the dot, or brackets. That's up to you. Why? This is the rule for dividing two fractions. Okay, so solution. Now, since we have inverted our second fraction, this now we cancel if we could cancel if we want, if we can. So let's break it down to simpler numbers. 4 is actually let me draw a straight line. 4 is 2 times 2, and then 25 is 5 times 5, prime numbers. So we have now 5 times, and 8 is actually 2 times 2 times 2. So once we get it to that point, we start to cancel our numbers, which we can, And so we have 1 times 1 times 1 times 5, and that will give us a value of 5. And 1 times 1 times 1 times 2, that will give us a value of 2. So that is how we end up with our value. Now another example is as follows. Consider the other example now. See, we have a whole number divided by a fraction. Strategy: we will need to write the first number as a fraction. So this number 80, we all know that as a fraction is 80 over 1, and then multiply the first fraction by the reciprocal of the second fraction. This reciprocal will be 11 over 20. Now multiply by the reciprocal of this, which is 11 over 20, and multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators, and cancel whatever you could cancel. 80 is actually, you break it down to simpler numbers that you want. You can say 4 times 20 times 11, 1 times 20. The 20 is cancelled out, giving us 4 times 11, which will be 44 over 1. But any number divided by 1 is always the whole number. Not to say that whenever you have something like this you will get a whole number, okay? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just simply saying that that's how you work it out. Let's try another example. Okay, and this other example is as follows. We have a how much example is there? C. Let's try example C. D. 2/3 divided by a negative value, -7, 6, divided by that value. Okay, we will multiply the first fraction here by the reciprocal of the second fraction, which is this one here. So that's what we will do. To determine the sign of the result, we will use the rule for multiplying two fractions that have different or unlike signs. We know that already. Why? One fraction is positive and one fraction is negative, so our value should be negative. So let's start our step. First fraction remains times the reciprocal of the second fraction, which is that. Okay, now let's expand. If you could cancel, 2 times 3 times 2 over 3 times 7. We know it's going to be negative, then we bring that down, negative, the 3's cancel out, giving us 2 times 2, which is 4 over 7. That's our solution. We work with these types of problems. Okay, now let's try another example. E. Consider a fraction which is a negative 35 over 16 divided by negative 7. That's the next fraction which we'll be dividing. We multiply the first fraction by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So that's our first step. Negative 35 over 16 times the reciprocal, but remember this is a negative 7, which is negative 7 over 1, so it becomes negative 1 over 7. Okay, we multiply the numerators, so let's multiply the numerators and let's expand them if we can. So it becomes negative 5 times 7. We all know that negative times a negative will make it a positive, times 1 over 16. You can leave it as that because nothing will cancel with that, and so the 7's will cancel out, giving us 5 over 16, and that's our solution for that problem there. Okay, so any problems of this form, there's a strategy how you will use. You will first of all take the same first fraction, keep it there, and then multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. Okay, if it's negative, remember it's reciprocal.